Hello, how are you guys doing? Welcome to Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Today I have two stories for you. Two stories of fathers who were executed for killing their own children. The crimes we are talking about today aren't well known, and as you know, we in the Dark Hearts community believe it is important to remember all the victims and not just the victims who get the most press coverage. Every victim matters and every story matters. I don't want what these two men did to be forgotten, and I do not want their victims to be forgotten. Don't forget to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you want to see more from me. Today, we are talking about death penalty dads. I'm your host, Stacy Lee. Let's begin. Our first killer dad is John Ruthell Henry. Florida, Dade City, and Zephyrville became the haunting backdrop for a series of family murders that would leave an indelible mark on the residents. John Ruthell Henry was born on January 16, 1951, in Zephyrville, Florida. His early life was marked by instability. John's father struggled with alcoholism, and his mother was often overwhelmed by the challenges of raising a family in difficult circumstances. John grew up in a somewhat dysfunctional household where love was scarce and violence was not uncommon. Reports indicate that John exhibited signs of psychological distress from a young age, frequently engaging in aggressive behavior, and at other times being almost a loner. John Ruthell Henry is described by people who knew him as someone who spent a lot of time by himself. He could often be found wandering in the woods near his home. This sounds very similar to Daniel LaPlante. If you remember this story, it's still one of my favorites to tell, The Boy in the Wall. This kid spent every free moment of his alone in the woods. That story still gives me the creeps. John's education was sporadic and he had difficulty making friends. After high school, he drifted through various jobs, never really settling into a stable career. This is something we see so much here in the true crime community. People who go on to be killers, often serial killers, have not only social challenges, but trouble holding a job. It was during these formative years that John Ruthell Henry began to develop violent tendencies that would later manifest in his horrific actions. John's criminal behavior began in August of 1975. He was traveling in Dade City, Florida, with his common-law wife, Patricia Roddy, and her two young daughters. The little girls were only 2 and 3 years old. The couple got into an argument. John stopped the car in a parking lot and flew into a rage. He pulled out a knife and began stabbing Patricia Roddy, inflicting 30 wounds on her body, primarily to her neck and upper body, with her kids in the car. That is life-changing trauma. To lose your mother as a child is awful. To lose your mother in front of your own eyes to a violent madman stabbing her to death. I honestly try not to think about things too much when I cover cases like these because they are so disturbing. It's more than just words that I say when you really sit and think about those moments. A 2-year-old and a 3-year-old baby in the car with their mom being attacked by this maniac. It's honestly sometimes too much for me. I gotta kind of block it, you know? As Patricia lay bleeding to death in the car, John ran into a wooded area in Zephyr Hills. He was tracked down and arrested by Deputy Faye Wilbur. Remember that name. Facing murder charges, John pled no contest to second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 15 years in prison and only did 7.5 years. He was released in January of 1983. Some of these older cases, I swear you guys, 7.5 years for stabbing a woman to death in front of her 2 toddlers, that's actually infuriating. After John was released, he married 28-year-old Suzanne Overstreet, a divorced mother working in Zephyr Hills as a convenience store clerk. Their marriage was violent. Both John and Suzanne were arrested multiple times for drug-related offenses. Suzanne often told friends and coworkers of hers that she was terrified of John, but she didn't know how to leave. She couldn't afford to. Things got so bad that Suzanne once snuck away from the house and sought shelter at a woman's refuge. After that, she got her own apartment. So this woman tried. She tried to get away, which makes this all the more tragic. On December 22nd, 1985, John Ruthell Henry went to Suzanne's apartment to discuss buying Christmas gifts for her 4-year-old son. His name was Eugene Christian, but he went by Buggy. As the couple talked, an argument broke out. John pulled out a knife. He claims that the couple struggled over it, but John wound up holding it, of course. Just another one of my many plugs for self-defense, ladies. Upper body strength to upper body strength. Fighting a man, we're going to come out on the losing end of that every time. John then stabbed Suzanne 13 times, killing her on the floor of her living room. John then sat down and smoked a cigarette next to Suzanne as she lay bleeding and dying. He then rolled Suzanne's body up in a rug and left her inside her apartment. He took the little boy, oh, this part is so disturbing. He took the little boy, Eugene, Buggy. He stole a car and he drove Eugene to a remote pasture near Thonotosasa. I hope I'm saying that right. There near a chicken farm, John Ruthell Henry stabbed this little boy to death and left him in the field. Yeah, this stuff with kids just hits different. The next morning, when Suzanne failed to show up for work, her sister went to her apartment and found her dead inside. When neighbors heard the sister screaming and saw the police arrive, they came forward to report that they'd seen John leaving the apartment with Eugene on the previous night. So the manhunt was on. The police searched the area and then got a tip that led them to a local motel called the Twilight Motel. John was there. He wasn't alone. He had another woman with him. So the police are walking around the area. They see his car. They know he's somewhere at the motel. And then Faye Wilbur, now Detective Faye Wilbur, the same man who'd arrested John Ruthell Henry a decade earlier for the murder of Patricia Roddy, Faye Wilbur spotted John at the motel, recognized him, and took him into custody for a second time. So just think about that. We are often critical of the police here on Dark Hearts. Sometimes the police are in need of criticism. But think what it must feel like as a cop to catch a murderer. He gets 7.5 years, and then 10 years later, you arrest the same man for a very similar crime. That has got to be frustrating. John was taken in for questioning and ultimately admitted to murdering Eugene Christian. He then led detectives to the boy's body, still lying in the field where he'd left it earlier. In a later interview, he also admitted to killing Eugene's mother, Suzanne. Because these murders took place in 2 separate counties, it was decided that John Ruthell Henry would have 2 separate trials, one in Hillsborough County for Christian's murder and one in Pasco County for Suzanne's. John's attorneys immediately began arguing to the court, telling the judge that John's confession wasn't written down or recorded. His attorneys also argued that John should be deemed ineligible for the death penalty because he was an alcoholic and a drug addict. That doesn't work in the legal system because you choose to drink alcohol and take drugs. So when that didn't work, the defense attorneys began claiming that John had low-grade schizophrenia and had suffered from that disease since birth. Now, I am no psychiatrist, but I have heard there are varying degrees of schizophrenia. But to my understanding, the disease most often manifests after adolescence. I couldn't find information to verify this, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say this man probably didn't receive the best the mental health system has to offer. So making claims that he was diagnosed with schizophrenia as an infant or a very young child is not only a stretch medically, but logistically as well. I say it all the time, defense attorneys gotta defend. So the judge ordered John to be examined by state psychiatrists who stated that John Ruthell Henry showed some mild signs of schizophrenia, but that the disease did not impact his judgment and that he knew the difference between right and wrong. We talk about this a lot. The legal definition of insanity is a very high bar. Attorneys must prove that their client is so impaired by mental illness that they cannot distinguish between right and wrong, and most criminals do not meet that standard. John Ruthell Henry was convicted on all counts at both trials, and he was sentenced to death twice. But hold on, 4 years later on appeal, it was decided that the jurors should not have been shown the autopsy photos of Christian's body, that the photos were inflammatory and angered the jury members. Now, I know this was a long time ago, but how in the hell does that work? This man killed the little boy. The jurors should see what was done to the child. I know that's hard for people on jurors, but they need to see what the person they're trying did. I couldn't find a lot more information on this, but it kind of made me mad. If a person does something monstrous and disturbing, the people deciding that person's fate should see the results of that monstrous and disturbing act. Somehow this worked, and it was ordered that John would get not one, but 2 new murder trials. Thankfully, both trials ended in the same verdict, and John was again sentenced to death twice. John Ruthell Henry spent the remainder of his life trying to get off death row, stating that he was intellectually disabled and had schizophrenia. His attorneys also stated that the abuse John suffered in childhood should be taken into account. His IQ was tested. It was only 70. Still, Governor Rick Scott signed the death warrant. On June 17, 2014, the last appeal was denied, and John's execution was set to take place the following day. Now, there was a lot of controversy surrounding executions at the time, if you remember this era. In 2014, Clayton Lockett's execution was botched. When he was injected with the lethal injection, he began to writhe in his restraints. Something went wrong. Officials halted the execution, but Clayton ended up dying of a heart attack. I was living in Texas when this happened, and I remember it because it was on the news a lot. The botched execution sent anti-execution protesters into a rage, and people began demanding that all executions be halted because there were supposedly problems with the cocktail of drugs that are used in an execution. We could talk about this for a long time. Do killers deserve a peaceful death where they just go to sleep? Or should they suffer like they made their victims suffer? Or should we not execute people at all? I mean, like I say, we could talk about it for days. The protests and the concerns did not stop John's execution. On June 18th, 2014, he was brought to the death chamber. Protesters gathered outside the prison and began to chant and pray. John refused a last meal. He was visited by some family members and was then strapped to the gurney. A group of the victims' family members sat in the front row as the curtains were opened. There were 24 people in the room. A white sheet was draped over John Henry. Tubes out of a wall unit went into his arms. He asked forgiveness in Jesus' name and then said, quote, "I can't undo what I've done. If I could, I would. I ask for your forgiveness if you can find it in your heart." His eyes fluttered and he yawned as the lethal injection was administered. At 7:34 p.m., his face lost color and he was pronounced dead. Selena Geiger, the niece of Suzanne Henry and cousin of Eugene Christian, held up a photo of Suzanne and said, "These are the victims. These are the ones we need to remember." After the execution, Selena told the press, "I actually feel good. I don't feel sorry for him. I wish it could have been different. I wish he could have died the way he killed them." John Ruthell Henry's life and crimes have rippled through the families of his victims. His story is not just one of a killer, but a stark reminder that not even babies are safe around such violent monsters. Our second death penalty dad is John Battaglia. He is the man at the center of this story, and he has been called the most hated man in Texas, and he earned that moniker. This is a tough one. You know, I don't do trigger warnings here because I figure this is a true crime channel. You wouldn't be here if you weren't prepared for dark stories, but I will tell you this is a tough one. John David Battalia Jr. was born in August of 1955 in Alabama. He attended high school in New Jersey and had plans to go to medical school, but he dropped out. He got into trouble for drugs and then he joined the Marines. After that, he became an accountant and moved to Dallas. It's said that while he was getting his CPA training, he also worked as a model. John had a daughter named Christy from his first marriage to a woman named Michelle Getty, who once filed charges against John for harassment and domestic violence. There were many instances of violence against Michelle outside her daughter's school, at home where he broke her nose, at a bus stop, and Michelle was even hospitalized. John Battalia got probation for those crimes. Probation for beating a woman over and over. Anybody, man, woman, they, them, if you get arrested more than once for domestic violence, jail. Serious jail time. Michelle got away from John, and he then met and married this woman, Mary Jean Pearle, who lived in Highland Park, Texas. The two were married in April of 1991. Together, Mary and John had two daughters, Mary Faith and Liberty May Battaglia. The two little girls attended school at John S. Bradfield Elementary in Highland Park. By January of 1999, Mary Jean had had enough, and she separated from John after a particularly abusive fight. Because of John's previous arrests, he was barred from having any contact with Mary. But by Christmas that same year, he was permitted to visit with Faith and Liberty. He went to Mary's house, where he attacked Mary again, and she called the police. John was again arrested, and that time pled guilty to a misdemeanor-level assault charge. Again, he was given only 2 years probation. After this incident, Mary Jean filed for divorce, and the divorce was final in August of 2000. John Battalia continued to harass Mary. He would call her and make threats against her. Mary went to the police again and also contacted John's parole officer. She filed a motion with the courts to have John's parole revoked, stating that John was not supposed to be calling her, sending her messages, or using pot, which he was. All of those actions violated the terms of John's probation. Mary was doing all she could to protect herself and her daughters from John, but he'd never been violent with the girls, and so the courts continued to allow him to visit them. I really want to say something right now, but I get accused of man-hating, which is so not the case. I love men. I despise bad men. You know what? I am going to say it. I know that I'm not a man-hater. We really have to die. We really have to die before action is taken a lot of the time. Women have to die before their abusers get locked up at times, and we have got to change the laws and strengthen police power to do more in these cases of repeated domestic violence. That goes both ways. If a woman is beaten on someone, she needs to get locked up. It's probation or something like the first 3 times, and it's not working. Oh, okay. I have a lot of new followers. I'm trying to be professional. You guys that know me well know I do go off on a rant once in a while, and it's because I'm passionate about this stuff. I wouldn't be sitting here 5 years later putting up with a lot of stuff I have to put up with for free if I wasn't passionate about this. We have got to strengthen the domestic violence penalties for repeat offenders. Everybody screws up, sometimes there's a fight, somebody gets arrested. I get that. But these people that repeat it over and over and over, they need real jail time. Rant over. I'm stalling because we're going to a really dark place here in a second. John Battalia was able to convince people that he was a good father. He spoke horribly about both his ex-wives to anyone who would listen, but he spoke lovingly about his daughters. People who knew John believed that yes, he hated his exes, but that he truly loved his daughters. Even his own daughter, Christy, who is now an adult, would later say that her father doted on her and never laid a hand on her. He had people fooled. And then John did the unthinkable. On May 2nd, 2001, Mary had to take Faith and Liberty to see their dad. It was his court-ordered visitation. Mary actually had to drag one of the little girls from underneath her bed because the little girl did not want to go and see her father. It was traumatic. But Mary had no choice. She didn't want to be arrested for custodial interference. So she loaded the girls into the car and drove to a parking lot to meet John. She was so afraid of John that she would only meet him in public places. Ugh. The little girls were crying and screaming, and Mary had to force them to go with their father. I gotta hold it together. Mary had to stand and watch John drive away with her girls with their little faces pressed up against the back window, crying and waving to her. and she never saw him again. I got too much makeup on to be crying like this. John was supposed to take the girls for a planned dinner at the mall. Instead, he took them to his apartment in the Adam Hat Lofts, which is in Dallas. John called Mary from his apartment. He swore at her, and as she listened, she could hear the little girls crying in the background. If you are new here, I have 2 little granddaughters, so I have a hard time talking about 2 little girls. All stories involving kids are sad, but when I talk about 2 little girls, it just does something to me. John took out a gun, and Mary listened helplessly as one of the girls yelled, "No, Daddy, please don't. Don't do it." Mary yelled through the phone, telling the girls to run, but there was nothing to be done. John Battalia, this piece of human shit, an actual monster, shot Faye 3 times. He then turned the gun on Liberty and shot her 5 times. Mary, their mother, heard the entire thing. John then said over the phone to Mary, "Merry f***ing Christmas," referring to his arrest over Christmas in '99. Just kind of had to rush through that. Mary hung up the phone and called 911. By the time the police got to the apartment, John was gone. He'd left a message on the answering machine in the girls' room. It said, "I'm just going to spit this out. Good night, my little babies. I hope you're resting in a different place. I love you. I wish that you had nothing to do with your mother. She was evil, vicious, stupid. You will be free of her. I love you very dearly. You were very brave girls. Very brave. Liberty, you were oh so brave. I love you so much. Bye." John left the apartment and went to a bar with his girlfriend. With his 2 babies laying dead on the floor of his apartment, he's sitting in a bar having a drink with his girlfriend. He then went to a tattoo parlor where he asked for 2 roses to be tattooed on his left upper arm. He told the tattoo artist that the 2 roses represented his 2 girls. The cops were immediately sent out to look for John at all of his local hangouts, and while they were canvassing the area, they located him. A fight ensued, and John was left with a black eye. He was arrested and taken into custody. A black eye. I think those cops showed some restraint because I'm sure that knowing what he'd done, there were officers who would have liked to do a lot more. Faith and Liberty were buried at Hillcrest Cemetery alongside Mary's father. The murder trial began in April of 2002. Jurors deliberated for only 19 minutes before convicting this piece of trash. Days later, John was sentenced to death. There has never been anyone more deserving. Mary took the stand, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. She told John to burn in hell, and I hope you religious people are right. I hope he does.
Tomorrow evening for the man behind one of the most heinous crimes in North Texas history. John Battalia killed his own children in 2001. Today, Steve Pickett spoke with the attorney who helped put him on death row. He's live in Deep Ellum, where the murders happened. And Steve, take us back to that night.
Well, it was a night that most people who were in this Dallas-Fort Worth area watching the news, frankly, will never forget. John Battalia was here on that night with his daughters inside his loft apartment. Faith and Liberty, 9 and 6 years of age, back on that night could be heard on a phone call that John Battalia had made to his ex-wife. He murdered his children, shooting them several times while the mother listened on the phone. The murders causing widespread shock, obviously, because it essentially contrasted with the other image of Battalia and his girls. They lived in a very quiet, upscale neighborhood in Highland Park. This idyllic view of how that family was, and to come to this circumstance and see that kind of domestic upheaval ended up with 2 girls having their lives taken. There seemed to be no one more hated in Dallas back in 2001 than the man who is now on death row and scheduled for this execution, Gilma.
And Steve, he is scheduled for execution tomorrow, but will it happen?
Oh, it appears that it will this time. This is essentially the 3rd opportunity. He has made appeals in the past. During one court hearing, for example, that I actually covered, it was John Battalia's father who told me that he simply just didn't believe that his son was mentally stable, and that's why he should not receive the death sentence. Howard Blackman, however, the former Dallas prosecutor who tried this case, he told me today he will not attend this execution. He believes it will happen, and the clock has simply run out for John Battalia.
Thank you, Steve.
He's been vetted so much. He's had so many chances, but now it's time to close this out. He just needs to go.
Left in all of this is the mother of those children who had lived here, trying to live through this horrible tragedy back now 17 years ago. She no longer lives in the Dallas area, has not frankly responded to interviews regarding this. She told she has remarried and gone on, but what many people in this community will never forget is what that man did to those two girls here, and see what the state will likely do to him tomorrow.
John Battalia sat in prison for 15 years running through his appeals. In 2017, his attorneys filed a motion to have him declared mentally incompetent. John gave an interview from prison.
But I had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old and a suicidal mother. So I stuck it out for another 5 years, and that piece just turned on me like you wouldn't believe. And she ruined my life, she ruined my daughter's life, and she ruined my daughter Christy's life.
And so why do you feel like it was a setup?
Because I told him I didn't want to go get my kids because I knew I was in trouble.
Why become violent with your daughters and not your wife if your wife is the one you were?
I don't know. That's not the situation that I understand. Okay.
I mean, do you feel like you were killing them to get back at your?
I don't feel like I killed.
You what?
I don't feel like I killed.
So why did you?
I do not know why. If you read what I wrote, you will find out that I am a little bit in the blank about what happened.
Mm-hmm.
Now, a lot of people wanted to have me say certain things, and I was given lots of nice drugs in the county jail, and I was given lots and lots of information that I didn't necessarily know. And after a while, I started repeating it.
Do you think about the times you have with them? Do you worry about where they are now?
No, I don't worry about where they are now. Why would I worry about where they are now?
Where do you think they are?
Where we all are. We're all here, all gone at the same time. I'm not worried about it. Nobody should be worried about it. People do, but that's people that have their own philosophies and their own way of dealing with existence. I have pictures of them up in my house. I have them on the table. I have them on the wall. I have them around me all the time.
On October 31st, 2017, John Battalia's death warrant was signed. His execution was set for February 1st, 2018, to take place in the Huntsville unit. By this time, the state of Texas had abolished customized last meal requests, so John's last meal was standard prison fare. I'm glad I didn't have to eat that one. My channel used to be called Dining with Death. I had an entire playlist dedicated to the last meals of death row inmates where I would tell the true crime story and then I would eat the last meal of the condemned. All of those videos are on the playlist on this channel called Dining with Death. I guess John was given like chicken patties and instant potatoes. John Battalia was then strapped to the gurney and the curtain was opened so the witnesses could see into the death chamber. There was not one single person sitting on the side of the room reserved for the inmates' witnesses. Not a priest, not a protester, not a single family member. Good. 62-year-old John remained ever the smug asshole right up until the end. He was asked to give a last statement, and he said, "See y'all later. Go ahead, please." He closed his eyes and then opened them again and said, "Am I still alive?" And then he said, "Oh, here, I feel it." He then began to gasp for breath and then snored loudly before dying. He was pronounced dead minutes later. As Mary walked away from the window, she said, "I've seen enough of him." I want to send love to Mary and Michelle, to Christine, to everyone whose lives have been forever changed by this evil and vicious man. If there is a hell, he is surely there. Whew, that was a rough one. I'm sorry for getting emotional. And if you wonder why I don't just record over, it's because it would happen again. I have a really hard time getting control of myself once I lose it. Talking about kids is always rough, but I've got these two little precious babies that mean the world to me, little sisters. And so when I think of two little sisters, it just sends me to a very emotional place, so I apologize. I sure appreciate you joining me here on Dark Hearts. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you like me and want to see more from me. This is my podcast. It's on Apple and Spotify. I post brand new episodes every Monday and Wednesday. We're going to go ahead and close up our fundraiser. I've donated this painting of mine. If you donate $5 to NECMEC, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, you get entered into a digital raffle. Somebody will end up owning the painting. If you don't win the painting, you have donated $5 $5 to a really good cause. I feel a mess. I am sure glad you guys joined me today. Help me get through that. It's important that we remember these stories, you know? I hope you're doing well and enjoying your summer. Stay safe, my friends, and be kind to each other. And I will see you next time on Dark Hearts with Stacy Lee. Bye.